Hello and good evening, everyone. Thank you for all for tuning in, and those who are watching this on YouTube when I upload it. This is going to be a lengthy presentation on the 2020 Atlantic Hurricane season. I want to give you guys an update on what to expect, give a recap on what we've gone through so far this season. It's been quite the season so far, with a lot of records being broken and very interesting storylines with these past hurricanes and tropical storms. So I'm going to give a recap of what has happened and answer the ultimate question: will this be a repeat of the 2005 Atlantic hurricane season? All that and more with this special presentation on the hurricane season so far in the August live update. So I'm going to switch my screen right now so you can see my presentation. Here we go, and we'll transition that. So for the time being, you won't be able to see me, just so you guys can see the full screen of my presentation, but you'll still be able to hear me talking throughout the presentation. So as I said, very active season so far, and just to give you a recap of what we've gone through so far, and this is recapping the first month, actually, the month of June, and parts of May as well. This has been the sixth consecutive year with a named storm before the official start of the season, with Tropical Storm Arthur and Bertha, both of which are the first time since two or more named storms developed before the start of the season and during the month of May. And that record is tied with 2012 and 1887. So just in the first month alone, we're tying records throughout history. And then we also had Tropical Storm Cristobal, the record earliest third named storm or sea named storm to form the Atlantic Basin. It was previously held by Tropical Storm Colin from 2016. And Cristobal formed actually from the remnants of Pacific Tropical Storm Amanda as it crossed over Latin America into the Gulf of Mexico. And this was all within the first month of the season. So far, between then and now, we've had 4 additional tropical storms, 2 hurricanes, and 1 tropical depression that was very short-lived, but not recognized by the National Hurricane Center nonetheless. Multiple tropical cyclone records were broken, particularly for earliest numbered storms, and the majority of those records that were previously held were broken from 2005. So there's a lot of discussion as to if this is going to top 2005's hurricane season. And we'll talk about that more later in the presentation. But right now, things are really starting to heat up in the Atlantic. Just to go over a recap of all the storms we've had, Tropical Storm Dolly was the third earliest fourth named storm. It was also the farthest north forming system on record in the Atlantic before June 1st, and also the second farthest on record before August 1st. And there's a special reason why I wanted to note that with Tropical Storm Dolly. So with this visual right here and the star, you can see Tropical Storm Dolly, well, it first formed on June 23rd. And if you look for the other dots, these are other tropical cyclones that formed between January 1st and July 31st between the years 1851 and 2019. And this is the most northest forming storm of these dots right here, except for this one just to the left. And the reason why that's so unusual is because in this area of the Atlantic, conditions are very unfavorable for a tropical cyclone to develop, mainly due to cooler temperatures along the ocean surface. There's a lot of wind shear up there, and it's just a very odd area to see that during the time of the year, since usually when we see hurricanes and tropical cyclones develop, you're looking in the Gulf for the start of the season. So that's a reason why I wanted to note that with Tropical Storm Dolly. Next one's Tropical Storm Edward. Not really much to say other than it was the earliest fifth named storm on record and started off July's month of tropical cyclones back to back to back. As we go into Tropical Storm Faye. Faye was the earliest sixth named storm, F named storm, surpassing 2005's Tropical Storm Franklin, which formed on July 21st. So it beat out by almost 10 days. And this is the first cyclone to make landfall in New Jersey since Sandy in 2012, and the first fully tropical cyclone to make landfall in New Jersey since Hurricane Irene back in 2011. All three of which I'm going to show you a picture in this next slide, made landfall between Atlantic City and Long Beach Island, which is a 25-mile stretch. And to see three tropical cyclones make landfall over New Jersey within this small area, as you can see by the outlined tracks, it's just very unusual, especially within the span of 10 years. Not even 10 years, because Irene was 2011, and this most recent storm, Faye, was this year. So we're talking almost within a less than 9-year span, these three tropical cyclones made landfall in this small gap of 25 miles. So that's something interesting I wanted to talk about with Faye, because it's very unusual to see that here in New Jersey, let alone anywhere in the U.S. Next one up is Tropical Storm Gonzalo. Again, another very short-lived tropical cyclone, but again, it was the record earliest 7th named storm, surpassing 2005's Tropical Storm Gert just by 3 days. So some of these records, even though they were beaten and were looking to a more active season overall, they were just squeaking out these records by days, and you can see that with other ones as well. Hurricane Hannah beat the earliest 5th named storm record just by a few days as well. Actually, a little more than that, a week, since Tropical Storm Harvey back in 2005 formed on August 3rd. And this was the first hurricane of this season and the first hurricane to make landfall in Texas since another Hurricane Harvey in 2017. So a lot of historical trailblazing tropical cyclones this year overall. And then we go into the next one, which is the most notable, Hurricane Isaias. Quite a little long-lived storm, formed July 30th and was the record earliest 9th named storm, surpassing 2005's Hurricane Irene by a week. So again, squeaking out that record just by a week, less than that almost. What's special about this hurricane overall is a tornado outbreak actually formed from Isaias over the mid-Atlantic and Northeast, and it featured the strongest tropical cyclone spawned tornado since 2005. And again, looking at this record, the previous record for strongest tropical cyclone tornado was back in 2005 with Hurricane Rita. It spawned an F3 tornado over Clayton, Louisiana on September 24th. But going back to Isaias, at least 34 tornadoes were confirmed to be spawned from Isaias in this outbreak in the U.S. Some other notes: it was the second tropical cyclone to make landfall over New Jersey this year, and the second tropical cyclone to impact the Northeast in the span of 3 weeks, which again is something very unusual to see in our region, since we don't really see that much tropical cyclone activity, unlike some of these southeastern states, especially Florida is hanging out right there in the Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico. So to see 2 tropical storms back to back within 3 weeks is unusual for our area. Excuse me. And then there was another one as well. You heard me talk about a tropical depression. This is a very short-lived tropical depression, but it was recognized by the National Hurricane Center as organized enough to be a tropical depression. The interesting thing about this was that it may have become a tropical storm during its lifetime and may have sustained tropical storm force winds. But fortunately or unfortunately, however you see it, the National Hurricane Center decided to maintain its current status due to heavy rainfall and other conditions that may have obscured accurate results with Tropical Depression 10. So this may have been Tropical Storm Josephine, going by the naming scheme, but for the time being, it is still Tropical Depression 10. It only lasted for about 2 days before going off and affecting Europe with some rain showers and light gusts of wind. So that's the breakdown of what we've seen so far, and a breakdown of the records broken this year. Record earliest names, 3rd, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th named storms to be specific, and 5 out of the 6 of those records were previously held by the 2005 season. Record number of named storms in May, with 2 storms, tying the record with 1887 in 2012. Record number of named storms in July, tying that record again with 2005. We had 5 storms just in the month of July alone. And that includes tropical storms, hurricanes, and actually it does not include tropical depressions. It only includes, again, named storms. Some other records broken. 2020 became the first year on record with 9 named storms before August, again breaking the record from 2005, and had the strongest tornado spawned by a tropical cyclone since 2005. So you see a little bit of a motif or something of a repeating pattern here. We are consistently breaking records and topping off 2005's Atlantic hurricane season, which was a very extremely active season with devastating impacts across the U.S. and across much of the Atlantic. So that leads us to the question, will history repeat itself with this hurricane season? We'll talk about that later with our forecast for the rest of the season, but the shortest answer is no. It will not repeat itself, mainly due to, if we look at 2005's hurricane season, they were in the process of having 4 hurricanes by the time of today, all 15 years ago. And this season has only seen 2 hurricanes, both of which were Category 1 hurricanes. So that's a big key difference between this season and 2005's season. And another thing to note is that we had an early start with Arthur and Bertha forming in the middle or towards the end of May, and then Cristobal cranked that out on the first day of the season. If you look at 2005 season, the first tropical cyclone didn't even form till mid June, and then from there it was a breakneck development, cyclone after cyclone. It was pretty much non-stop tropical cyclone development for 2005. And another thing to note as well, tropical cyclone development continued even after the end of the hurricane season. So usually the season would end on November 30th, but due to very favorable conditions, we had gone past the bounds of the Atlantic hurricane season and had 2 tropical cyclones develop in 2005. Tropical storm Zeta in late December going into January, which is again another unusual thing. And then earlier on in December, there was Hurricane Epsilon towards the end of the season going into December. So that's another key thing to note right now. Even though we're in August, though, it's not likely we'll see such active development that 2005 had, with tropical cyclones forming even after the season had ended. Another thing I wanted to look at was the accumulated cyclone energy. Basically what that is there's a formula that calculates the amount of energy that a tropical cyclone expels or uses during its lifetime. And the only way that it's calculated is if there are 34 mile per hour winds affecting a certain area within an advised area. So up until August 7th, which today, 2005 only had 69 units of ACE, while this year so far we're looking at about 22 ACE. So we're not at the level of 2005's hurricane season, but it could definitely give that season a run for its money, especially since actually this average is not even for up until this month. This is just the annual ACE for any hurricane season. The average total up till August would usually be around possibly 9 or 10. So that just goes to show you how active this season is so far, nonetheless. So with that said, we're looking at a pretty active hurricane season overall over the past few months. And so now we get into the most important talk of this presentation, what we're going to see for the rest of the season. And there's a lot of key factors that go into that, but before I go into that, we are approaching the peak of the season. In this yellow is where we're at right now, and then to the right of it is the rest of the season. That's about 90% of the season still remaining, and the activity that we're going to see for this season overall. So we're not even at the peak yet, and we're already had 9 named storms and 1 depression, of course. So that's something to take note of as we look at these forecast conditions. So again, not much has changed from what we look at from the last few updates that I did, the one I did before the season started, and then on June 1st. Biggest key thing to look at right now is the El Nino Southern Oscillation. I'll talk a bit more about that, why that's important, what that is in just a second. There's also trade winds, which are also affected by the El Nino Southern Oscillation. There are sea surface temperatures, because that's a big key factor into hurricane and tropical cyclone development. There's another one that I want to talk about, which is a little more of an advanced forecasting tool, but it's something that a lot of forecasters have been talking about lately with this season. It's the Atlantic Multidecadal Oscillation. And then other than that, looking long term, there are other climate patterns that we look at overall. To look at for the short term, there's a lot of things for that. There's the Saharan dust to look at, and moisture. There's sea surface temperatures again. And then another thing to look at is common areas of development. Unfortunately, I did not include a visual of where we would be expecting tropical cyclone development for the month of August going into September, but I can generalize it towards the parts of the mid-Atlantic, parts of the Cabo Islands. That's where we're really going to be seeing cyclones develop for the next few months going into the end of the hurricane season. And that's because there are a lot of key factors as to why that's a special location for tropical cyclone development. I'll talk about that later on in the presentation. So, some key factors for tropical cyclone development: you need warm sea surface temperatures, you need warm moist air, little to no vertical wind shear, which is changed within the atmosphere of wind speed or direction with change of altitude. The more you have of that, the more likely the tropical cyclone is to dissipate and just kind of disappear from that. And another few other things are particulates with the air. The Saharan dust I had mentioned, that's a key factor into forecasting tropical cyclones short term. And there's some other smaller things that we look at for the short term. So going back into forecasting the rest of this season, we're going to talk about the ENSO, the El Nino La Nina Southern Oscillation. That's an irregularly periodic climate pattern that has widespread global impacts on climate patterns and weather for areas of the globe. So this is not only useful for forecasting for tropical cyclones during the season, this is also helpful for getting an idea of what the pattern is going to be like over the course of weeks to months for a certain area of the globe. That's something I'll have to talk about more in depth in the future. But basically, with tropical cyclones, what we look at is there are two phases to this oscillation. There's the La Nina phase or the El Nino phase. The La Nina phase is cooler waters. I'm going to go back to this picture actually, because this actually shows a El Nino, and this oscillation is over the eastern Pacific, and just goes to show you. So in this white and red is warmer temperatures, and that's the El Nino from 1997. This particular image was taken in December by NASA and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So very interesting and a very famous photo when you think of El Nino, La Nina, or the ENSO. So going back to forecasting for the hurricane season, the La Nina is a cooler surface temperatures over this area, and what that translates to in the Atlantic is weaker vertical wind shear and trade winds and less atmospheric stability. So all those equate to more hurricanes in the Atlantic and more favorable conditions overall for hurricanes and tropical cyclones to form. And inversely, it has fewer hurricanes to form in the Pacific due to stronger vertical wind shear and cooler temperatures in the Pacific. Now, the other part of the oscillation is the El Nino phase. I'm pretty sure a lot of you have heard this in forecasts and news stories. This is a warmer area in the Pacific, and what that translates to in the Atlantic is stronger vertical wind shear and trade winds and more atmospheric stability. So what that translates to overall, in short, is less hurricanes in the Atlantic. So basically, La Nina, more hurricanes, La Nina, more hurricanes, El Nino, less hurricanes. and that's the basic pattern forecasting with the El Nino oscillation. So what are we looking at over the next few months? There's a La Nina watch now in effect, and that could come into play towards the peak of the season. These blue bars on the graph are the probability of a La Nina coming in during these 3-month intervals. So as you can see, June, July, August, that's where approximately where we're at right now. As you can see, by the next few months, we are trending towards a greater probability of going into a La Nina towards the peak of the season. That's going to be more favorable for tropical cyclones and increases the chance of more tropical cyclones to happen during the peak. So not only are we looking at moving in towards the peak, which is naturally the most active part of the season, we're looking at other factors that are going to enhance that activity over the next few months and for the end of the season. So that pretty much sums up this part of the slide. And then looking at the ensemble forecast, I've talked about ensembles in the past on several videos, forecasts, and live streams. And basically what an ensemble is the same model, but with slight changes with each member, as they call it. These changes reflect anything from uncertainty to subtle or even great changes in the atmosphere, because it all takes a subtle change in the atmosphere to have monumental changes down the line. So the NCEP, or the National Centers for Climate and Environmental Prediction, ensemble forecast are forecasting La Nina conditions as early as the end of August or the beginning of September, which again is close to the peak of the season. So again, we're looking at a La Nina coming in realistically towards the end of this month, going into the peak of the season, which is September. So big thing to note for that for the rest of the forecast overall. Another thing I wanted to talk about, and I talked about it the last time for the June update, is the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation. Basically what this is, or the AMO, it's basically like the El Nino climate oscillation, that it's a climate cycle that affects sea surface temperatures. But this particular climate pattern is based over the North Atlantic Ocean. And basically there are different phases that are spread out over decades of on a time scale. Basically what we look at for the AMO is 2 phases. There's a warm phase and a red phase. Warm phase usually means warmer conditions and more favorable conditions for tropical development overall, and the cold phase, or the blue, represents cooler conditions and less favorable conditions overall. So right now we are circled in this green right now. This is more towards May, June, but it just goes to show you we're in quite the warm phase for the AMO. So what that's going to translate to is more tropical cyclone activity due to more favorable conditions. This adds to the warm sea surface temperatures that we're already experiencing overall, and I'll talk about that in just a second. So overall, what we're seeing right now is a lot more favorable conditions for the next half of the season. So I had mentioned sea surface temperatures just before. Right now, still forecasted to be above average for the rest of the season, and in combination with the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, or the AMO, it's just going to present even more warmer sea surface temperatures overall for the rest of the season. So a breakdown of what we're expecting right now and comparing it back to 2005. 2005's hurricane season has similar conditions to what we're seeing right now, and I've been saying this since the start, or even before the start of the hurricane season, that we are seeing similar conditions to 2005. The AMO is currently in a warm phase, and overall that increases the potency of the environment and the favorable conditions for tropical cyclone development, and it decreases vertical wind shear as well, which is another favorable thing for tropical cyclone development. Another key comparison between this year and 2005 is that sea surface temperatures are warmer than average. And that usually means a better foundation for development, more fuel for the tropical cyclone to intensify and develop. Although I will note it's not currently as warm as 2005 season. 2005 had almost record-breaking sea surface temperatures, and so that explains why there were a lot of tropical cyclones in the year 2005, and a lot of hurricanes as well, a lot of major hurricanes, Katrina, Rita, Wilma, just to name a few from that season. Another key thing is there's a weak El Nino in the beginning of the calendar year, and that speaks for this year in 2005. And then towards the middle of the year, going into the start of the hurricane season, it switches to a neutral phase where it's kind of in the middle, so it's not really favorable or unfavorable. It's just kind of in the middle for the majority of the hurricane season. And then towards the end of the season, there was a La Nina phase that came in and helped out enhance the activity during the peak of the season. And again, La Nina increases trade winds and decreases trade winds and wind shear over the Atlantic, and all of which these are favorable for tropical development. So overall, we're looking at almost the same conditions as 2005, aside from the slight differences in the sea surface temperatures. There's another key thing I wanted to mention with this. I don't have a slide on it. There is another weather climate factor that plays into tropical cyclone development from here on out, and I talked about in the past with tropical cyclones developing over the Cabo Verde Islands. I'm actually going to pull up those pictures just to give you an idea of where we're expecting things to go from here on out in terms of tropical cyclone development. So just going a little bit off of the presentation and the what we're talking about for just a second. We're going to look at, if I can find it, of course. I have a lot of different forecasting tools and visuals that I have in my Soaring Weather photo on my computer. So it's just all comes down to finding where that is at. Hopefully I can find it. Just give me like a few seconds and I will find it. But overall, this one thing that I wanted to talk about. So there's this weather climate pattern over Africa called a monsoon, and that's basically a weather pattern that switches between extremely moist and a lot of rainfall and extremely dry and little rainfall. And that affects the weather over Africa, and monsoons overall affect a lot of different portions of the world. During the wet phase of a monsoon, you can see extreme rainfall of up to, I can't give an exact value, but there are extreme cases where there's been extreme flash flooding from these wet monsoon events. And then in the dry instance, there'd be extreme droughts over certain parts of the world during the dry phase of these monsoons. So there's a monsoon over Africa right now that's currently going to come into play for tropical cyclone development over the next few weeks to pretty much the rest of the season. And let me see, I think I found our photo. I'm just going to make sure this is the one. Alright, perfect, I found it. Alright, so this was generated by taking past tracks that were formed, past cyclones that were formed in the Atlantic, and then taking their tracks and then looking at patterns overall over the course of each month of the hurricane season. So right now, this month, August, we're looking at hurricanes to form or start developing off the coast of Africa by the Cabo Verde Islands. And that's where you hear Cabo Verde hurricanes a lot. It's because it forms just to the south of the Cabo Verde Islands, right over here. And these tropical cyclones actually form from tropical waves that come off the African coast. So the reason why I'm mentioning this African monsoon is because they're going to go into a wet phase of the monsoon in Africa, and that's going to increase the number of tropical waves that get pumped out off the African coast. So we're not only looking at more favorable conditions overall, we're looking at more chances of a tropical cyclone developing over the course of the rest of the season. So we're going to see a lot of tropical waves come off the coast of Africa and a lot of cyclone activity towards that end of the Atlantic. I'll also show off September if I can find that. Here we go. So September, same thing as August, again looking for tropical cyclones to develop by the Cabo Verde Islands. But now at this point, compared to August, they can form pretty much anywhere in the Atlantic just because the ocean is so warm. There are a lot of favorable conditions during this time of the year, which is why we call it the peak of the season. This is where we see a lot of the season's activity overall. So that, after looking at that and stuff and diverging just a little bit, we'll talk about forecast outlooks for this year. So we're going to take a look at preseason outlooks, seasonal outlooks that were issued before the start of the season or towards the start of it, and we're going to look at outlooks right now. So August 1 is mid-July. They haven't updated theirs yet, and I'm looking at the weather company specifically. So looking at the top, this is all pre-seasonal outlooks with the average listed off to the left. So our averages for the hurricane season are usually 12 named storms, 6.5 hurricanes. That's, again, an average, so that would equate down to about 6 hurricanes. And then about 3 major hurricanes, so Category 3 or stronger. Usually that's what we see during the Atlantic hurricane season. So towards the start of the season, many forecasting agencies were already saying it's going to be slightly active this season. Colorado State University was saying 19 named storms. I'm going to mainly look at that specifically because that takes into account tropical storms and hurricanes and major hurricanes overall. So that pretty much gives a total value of the season overall. So Colorado State University, which is a very prominent forecasting agency and a very well-known university for its hurricane outlooks and its weather-related forecasts and programs over there. 19 named storms were issued for the start of, before the start of the season. I'm going to include another one as well, Tropical Storm Risk, or TSR, which is a University of College London-based forecasting group. They forecasted 17 named storms at the start of the season, before the start of the season. The Weather Company, or also known as the Weather Channel for some people, 18 named storms, and then the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or as I like to call it, NOAA, they give a little more of a broader gap, but they said 13 to 19 named storms overall. So overall, we're looking at, towards the beginning of the season, all of these forecasting agencies looking at slightly above average activity for the season. Now looking at the bottom is where we're looking at outlooks right now. So these are the latest outlooks issued by these same forecasting groups and agencies. So Colorado State University just recently updated their values. They're looking at 24 named storms compared to 19 back in the start of the season, 12 hurricanes overall, and 5 major hurricanes. TSR, or the Tropical Storm Risk, again, also 24 named storms, slightly less than Colorado State University's hurricane and major hurricane values, but again, still higher, almost double the value from what we usually see for any Atlantic hurricane season. The Weather Company also upped their named storm values to 20, but weirdly enough decreased their forecasted number of hurricanes for this year down to 8. So just a slight decrease in their forecast for the amount of hurricanes we'll see this season. And then finally, we get to the biggest forecast outlook for this season, the biggest change. We go from 13 to 19 from NOAA to 19 to 25 named storms for this season. Now, this is another record within itself. This is the highest forecast ever issued for, or outlook issued for a season by NOAA ever. And 2005 never had an outlook like that, even despite its record activity up to this point. So this is just goes to show you that this is going to be a very very active season overall. And then breaking down the rest of the outlook, 7 to 11 hurricanes, and they're sticking with their original number of 3 to 6 major hurricanes for this season. Now, I'm not trying to fearmonger in any way, and I will note something as well on top of these outlooks. Even though we've had record-breaking activity, only a few of these storms have had impacts over the U.S., mainly with Isaias, Faye, and then Hannah over Texas. And another thing to point out, between 2005 and now, we've only had 2 hurricanes compared to 2005, which had 5 hurricanes. Well, they're 5th in the working by this time. So, again, I'm not trying to fearmonger. This is just showing you what people and forecasters are looking at right now. So that leads into one of the last things for this live talk. It's going to be our forecast here at Soaring Weather. So due to the increased probability of La Nina coming in towards the end of the season, the AMO coming into right now in a warm phase, above average sea surface temperatures before the start of the season and forecasted towards the end of the season, and then also the current trend of tropical cyclone development, we here at Soaring Weather are going to be upping our total number of named storms and hurricanes for the season overall. So right now, I'm going to be looking at 24 to 26 named storms for the total for the season, 11 to 13 hurricanes total, and 5 to 6 major hurricanes overall for the rest of the season. And I should update that date for NOAA. I'll make sure to update that before I post this actual photo up onto Facebook and all the social media pages. That date was actually August 5th, not May 21st. So just noting that right now for you all. So overall, I am forecasting a very active season. Do I think it's going to be more active than 2005? Most likely not, because there are a lot more favorable conditions from 2005 compared to now. But a lot of those conditions are similar to 2005 when looking at this year overall. So again, we're looking at a very extremely active hurricane season for going into the peak of the hurricane season and going towards the end. Now, another final thing I wanted to show you guys is my 2020 Atlantic Tropical Cyclone name chart that I usually put out with any tropical cyclone that gets named. So you'll see in the gray and striped out is all of the used names we have used at this point, and in the white to the right is names yet to be used this year. So going back to my forecast of 24 to 26 names, that takes us over the amount of names that we have for this season. So I wanted to bring an interesting point to you guys. If this does happen, this will be the second time that we go to another naming scheme that 2005 had used, since there are only a set number of names for the season. So, and you'll see that note at the bottom. If we go over 21 named tropical cyclones for a season and use all of the available names for this year's list, additional tropical cyclones will be using the Greek alphabet. And so for now on, I'm going to be showing off this updated graphic with some of the Greek alphabet names to the right. So that includes Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta, Epsilon, and Zeta. And I only included up to Zeta only because 2005 had gone up to Zeta. I don't think we'll get up to that point where we have to go past Zeta, but I want to include that in the visuals from here on out for the names overall. So that kind of concludes everything that I wanted to talk about. Yeah, so that concludes everything that I wanted to talk to you guys about for the rest of the season, what we're going to be expecting, just quick breakdown for those watching at the tail end of the season. Overall, very active season in store for the next few months. And we go over to the National Hurricane Center. I just want to show this off real quick before I end things here. I had said in one of my daily live streams that we would be seeing a quiet period over the next few weeks because of all of the dry air that's going to be over the Atlantic that will hinder tropical cyclone development. And lo and behold, looking at the National Hurricane Center's outlook, there's a small area right now just west of the Cabo Verde Islands. Not that favorable to develop over the next few days, but it just goes to show you that this year's been beating expectations overall by everyone. So there's a lot of surprises still in store for this year. So we'll have to watch this overall, see if that becomes Josephine over the next few days. So that concludes this live update on the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season for the month of August. If you have any questions, feel free to comment them down below in the video if you're on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, etc., or even message or email me on the social media platforms. And there's also email listed on the Facebook page as well if you have any questions or if you want to talk about anything per se. So again, that will conclude our live update for tonight. Tomorrow we'll be resuming the daily live updates. I had some technical issues with Facebook Live over the course of the past few days, and a lot of schoolwork come up, so took a little bit of a break from that for a second to attend to those issues, but they will be picking up starting tomorrow, 10 a.m. on Facebook Live, showing me about half an hour overall for these daily live weather discussions. So again, concludes everything. If you missed this live stream, it will be uploaded to YouTube and it will still remain on Facebook. And yeah, that concludes everything. Have a good night, everyone. Be safe and take care. Be safe, be healthy.